Unbroken, the podcast with Madeleine Black. Healing through storytelling.
Hello and welcome to Unbroken, the podcast with me, Madeleine Black, where I speak to people that have been through tough times in life, but have bounced forward, not just back, really thriving now. And we will just interview them to hear their wisdom and how they got to where they're at. So today's guest is Alex Williams. Alex is an authenticity coach, inspirational speaker, and mental health nurse with 16 years of clinical experience working with people and organizations to improve their confidence, self-belief, and well-being. Sharing his own expertise and lived experience of overcoming trauma, Alex is determined to change the paradigm around mental health and show people that regardless of what happens to you, your future is still in your hands. So good morning, Alex, and welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Absolute pleasure. So the very first question I ask all of my guests is that what does the word unbroken mean to you?
Great question. To me, it means what has happened to you does not have to determine what can happen for you.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I love that line in your bio that regardless of what happens to you, your future is in your hands. So it's all about choice, really, isn't it?
exactly.
So we need to go back into your life to really find out what happened to you and how you're not defined by what happened to you. So when you were very little, 2 or 3, your parents divorced?
Yes. So 2 and 3, I was born into a standard family. You know, mum and dad were together, had a younger sister, but around 3, my mum and dad divorced after my dad had an affair. So then it was the usual living between parents. Went with my dad every other weekend. My mum was predominantly raising me.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, my mum met someone else. She got into a relationship with a new guy. She married him, so he became a stepdad. And then we moved into a house where I had 2 older brothers and a stepsister. Now, during those next few years, things started to happen. I witnessed domestic abuse in the sense of I saw my stepdad beat up his own kids and kind of was living in a state of fear. I also had my sister who was very poorly from a young age. You know, she has rheumatoid arthritis, so she had a lot of needs herself. And I found it very challenging. Wanted to live.
Must have been more than challenging. It must have been terrifying as a young boy to witness the domestic abuse. Was he also abusive towards your mother or just his children?
I never saw any abuse to my mother, thank God. And I think my mum was quite strong-willed in that sense. I think there were threats towards me, but my mum was very much like, it's not your role to discipline me. You're the stepdad. This is for me to deal with. So I think he wanted to discipline us. And luckily my mum was very firm in that and didn't have that. But that didn't mean that I wasn't aware of what was going on. I think at the time probably wasn't aware of it, but that state of fear, living in that state of, am I going to be next? So it wasn't.
I was going to say it's still abusive, whether you're experiencing that abuse or not. Living in that environment, it's still putting you in a constant state of fear.
Yeah, 100%. But when you're a kid, it becomes your normality. That for me, that was kind of normal. It was like, even though I was aware it probably wasn't, you watch your Disney films, you see the ideal families and the relationships that are happening, but my life wasn't exactly like that. But when I got to about the age of 8, and just before was when the biggest thing that happened to me in my life happened. And just before that, I remember I was so scared of sleeping in my room that I actually slept in my sister's room. And one night, about 3 a.m, police officers burst into my room, and I was like, woke me up, me and my sister up, and I was like, what's going on here? So in my pajamas, they walked me down the stairs, they put me into a big police car with my step brothers and sister, and they took us to the police station. Now I was only 8, so for me, like, the police were there to arrest bad people. And I was thinking, well, I haven't done anything wrong. I mean, I was a bit of a naughty kid, I was mischievous and constantly seeking attention, talking in class. So I was like, have I done something wrong that I'm not aware of? But I hadn't. So I was like, well, what's this all about? And the the police.
And you hadn't heard anything at home, did you?
No, nothing whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever. So I was like really confused. But then the police five of them took me and my sister into a room and sat us down. One of them leant over and just said, "I'm sorry, your mum is dead."
And did they explain how she had died?
No explanation. It was just, your mum is dead. Now, my obviously initial reaction, I just burst into my tears. I looked over to my sister, who looked, I think because she was younger than me, looked at me and was like, "Oh, my brother's crying. I need to cry." And but obviously we were both just distraught. And it was then we were just kind of put into a room with our stepbrothers and stepsister. Now, I never knew if they were told, but I'm going to assume that they were told before us, because they were very much, they look after us that night. And then from then on, it was like the next day we just put into a home, and then my dad come all the way from London where he was working and just picked us up. So
when did you find out the truth about how your mum died?
I think it was shortly after, in the first couple of days. I think it's hard to remember because it was all a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
But one of my vivid memories was sitting there around my grandparents, because literally my dad didn't have anywhere to bring us up. He had a 1-bedroom flat in Chelsea working as a lawyer. So he took us to his parents. And I remember sitting there in front of the TV and it come up on the news. Like it was literally only like a 10-minute clip. Woman has been killed in her house. And by this person. I was like, okay, so it's murder, it's manslaughter. It's basically he's done this. And that was kind of my memory of how I found out.
And this person was your stepfather?
Yes, it was my stepfather. So the person I was scared of all along, who I was scared of hurting me, actually ended up taking my mum's life, which was, it was difficult.
Well, you say difficult. As you say it, it just kind of, I get goosebumps listening to it. It's just, there could be nothing more traumatic for a child. Well,
this is it. And you know, the scary thing for me, I think, was it was just in the room next door. So my mum was sleeping in the room next door to me when it all happened. And I think as an 8-year-old, it's just something you know, when you're young, you don't expect these things to happen. And I guess, you know, often when tragedy strikes, it's like it's unexpected to an extent. But at 8, you know, I envisaged my mum would be there for, you know, not at 8 that I was really thinking about these things, but, you know, when I'm picking my subjects at school, when I deciding what career I want to take, to introduce my first girlfriend and get married, have kids, these are things you imagine your mum's going to be there for. And obviously we all have this idyllic view of things. When things go wrong, we always view that things are going to be really would have been really good, but which we don't know. But they were the things I was imagining, the things that I didn't really.
But you had a picture, an image of how you wanted your life to unfold, and it didn't go that way, is what you're saying.
Exactly. All
the normal dreams, you know, introducing your mum to your partner or girlfriend, or whatever, is that was taken away from you in that night when your stepdad made that decision for whatever reason.
Exactly.
And he was sentenced?
Yes. To be honest, I don't know how long he actually got. A lot of it was basically from that point. A lot of what happened is still, to me, a lot of it is unknown. It was a lot of it was sheltered from me.
And you weren't allowed to go to the funeral, were you?
I didn't go to the funeral. No. For me,
how do you feel about that now as an adult? Do you think it would have made a difference?
I think that it doesn't matter what age you are, you should be encouraged to grieve. And I think, and I've learned that, you know, and as we, you know, later on in life, I really learned the importance of grieving. Because I think, you know, there's nothing more certain, isn't there, than death. You know, we're always, birth and death has happened all the time. We go to bed, we wake up, you know, we start a new job, we leave, and we leave old jobs, and all these sort of things. It always happens. And I completely understand that it was so horrific what happened, that my dad was trying to protect me from it. The good intentions are there, but I actually think, yes, it not being able to grieve actually really delayed the whole grieving process for me. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I did get the chance to go to a funeral when the hospital rang up and said, "We haven't buried all your mum." So in a way, I know.
I didn't know that part.
No, it is which was kind of, in a way, it was a very weird, surreal experience. My auntie rang me when I was I think I was 29 at the time, and said, "By the way, a hospital rang and just said, we found these body parts." of your sister. So obviously my mum, I'm really sorry. And so obviously that was like, what?
And I don't want to get into the gruesome details. Is that because of the autopsy or what he did to her?
Yes, so I think it was autopsy.
Okay.
It was the autopsy. Yes.
Chop her up into pieces. No. Okay.
Yeah, autopsy. So it was like, so then it was kind of like the thoughts in your mind at that time. I remember being like, God, I wish, have I got what I wished for? You know, because you kind of like those sort of things go through. So I kind of got it, but again, it was, you know, for me, it was what 21 years later than it should have been, and even then, it didn't allow me to grieve how I kind of hoped I was able to.
So you moved to your dad's.
Yes.
Your dad only had a one-bedroom flat, so you were pretty much brought up by your grandparents, really, weren't you?
Yeah, so I had a year, literally. So my dad was a very successful lawyer, earned a lot of money, and I think his idea, he wasn't expecting this. He wasn't prepared in any way, shape or form to suddenly become a sole parent for us.
Did he have a new partner at all, your dad? Had he moved on?
My dad had few partners.
Okay.
Is the best way I can describe it.
Okay.
My dad, I think, just enjoyed doing his own thing and having that sort of life. But his idea, I think, when my mum, he didn't know what to do. And I think what he thought was, right, I'm going to put all this money into building a physical environment for my kids to be raised in, like the idyllic, you know, house, big house. I had a football pitch in my garden. You know, I had a swimming pool. He literally put all this money into it. So on the outside, it was like, wow, you've got all this stuff. You're really lucky.
All this material stuff, but I'm hearing you didn't have time. You didn't have a connection. You didn't have a relationship.
Yeah, it was the emotional environment which I kind of realized I lacked, because as I grew up, I think, and not, I don't think there was any kind of conscious intention to deny that from me, but I think from my dad's own skills and abilities as a parent and as a human, he didn't know how to do that. And I think, so he felt like, well, if I give you this, you'll be okay. But what actually happened is very quickly over the next few years, it was kind of, I looked around and thought, is someone going to ask me if I'm okay? I'm you know, I'm an 8-9-year-old boy, you know, I'm like,
were you offered any kind of therapy or any kind of support?
I think in a few years afterwards, we had a couple of sessions with CAMS, literally saw a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And I don't really recall much of it or the outcome of why we were pulled out of it. Again, I don't really know any of that. But I remember, I think we were just like kind of behaving oddly. Well, not oddly, actually, you know.
You were grieving in the normal way, yes.
Yeah. And I think it was that, you know, if what we don't express, you know, through words and through emotions, it tends to come out in other ways.
It has to come out somehow, absolutely.
Exactly. And I think in my behavior probably explained a lot of this kind of need to, as growing up, feel significant and important and stand out. I would kind of play up, not in a bad, well, not in a bad way, just like to talk. I was very mischievous. I wanted to be the center of attention, probably because I didn't feel like I was getting the attention I wanted from in the way I wanted emotionally from my dad. So, but very quickly, what I didn't realize at the time is I was actually doing that because I had this belief inside that I just didn't matter. What I was experiencing didn't matter. So how could I matter? Well, I will matter by being funny, by standing out, by doing stupid things. I'll find ways to matter, find ways to seek approval.
Yeah, it's almost like pleasing people, isn't it?
Exactly.
Getting their approval.
Exactly. And so that kind of really quickly kind of happened for me. And then it was kind of like growing, as I got a little bit older into school, I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and no one knows. And I think we put a lot of expectation on young people to figure out what they want to do. So like, but I wasn't really clever in a sense of I wasn't very good at concentrating. You know, I was kind of labeled as someone who wasn't academic, but I was good at football. Mm-hmm. So I played football and I did all right in that. And I seemed to get a lot of love and affection in that. But as I got older, and the reality, you know, football's a hard thing to make a profession of, and I was never going to get there. And I'm quite short. I wasn't born in the era of Iniesta and Xavi, where little Spanish players are considered the best players in the world. It's all about being a big brute at my time. So when that didn't happen, I kind of was like looking around. So what do I do? You know, and my dad, you know, he's a successful lawyer. He knows what I should be doing. So it was like science, do your sciences or become a lawyer, be a doctor or a lawyer, you know, the common theme we get. Well, I never really wanted to do that, but I thought, oh, you know what, he's right. He knows what he's doing. But when I failed at that, it was like, and I had no real kind of purpose or sense of what I was going to do in my life. I kind of, in the way I perceived how he perceived me, was that I just wasn't good enough.
But your heart wasn't never in these subjects, was it?
Exactly.
You
And
weren't
so
doing it for you.
I was invested in something that I never really was invested in. I just was, again, seeking that approval, that, you know, that acceptance from the people who mattered most to me. So I then turned my attention to, you know, well, okay, my life goal is literally, I'm going to have a family and kids one day. I can't get this one wrong. Surely, you know, how can I get this wrong? I'll just be a dad. I'll get some kind of steady job. And I had my first girlfriend around this time, and that's when I became a mental health nurse. And
what age are you around this time?
So I met her when I was about 18, and it was 21 when I decided to become a mental health nurse. I worked in bars. I tried doing some IT stuff. It bored me to tears. And then it was like, well, they were like, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And they said, why don't you become a mental health nurse? Well, kind of what pulled me into it was because they said I should do it, but also my mum and my gran were general nurses. So it's kind of in, you know, they can't, oh, it's in your blood, it's in your genes, go be a nurse. And I thought, okay. And you got paid at the time to do it. So for me, it's like, brilliant. If I don't like it, well, at least I'm getting paid, you know, what have I got to lose? And it turns out I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so then really when I had a career, I kind of had some purpose. I kind of created a community within that role in one town, and I kind of just stayed in that same job. And for like probably 10 years, obviously I had a few girlfriends, and when things fell apart, it kind of shone bits on me, shone bits on my life that I wasn't aware of. But you know, eventually I'll get another girlfriend and things would be okay. So I was always looking outside of myself to kind of fill the holes that I wasn't aware of looking at. And again, as I said, I created this community in the town I was living in. So I kind of was able to meet my needs, but I was doing it really out of fear. And it kind of really dawned on me in the moment when I was 34, and I got with a girl. I was with a girl with her a few years, lovely person. I haven't got a bad word to say about her, but we come to a point where we decided we weren't going to be together. Now we were engaged, had our own house, we had a mortgage, we were talking about going to have kids. And so that vision that I planted in my head, because I wasn't good enough, because what didn't matter, that vision of having a family was so close, so close. I thought, I'm there to completing life. I'm close to completing life. And then it was just taken away from me. And it was like, now my initial reaction was to like blame the people around me, you know, blame her. So what have you done to me? Oh, you know, you just, you know, all the stuff we tend to do when we're hurt, we project it onto others, don't we? We don't want to kind of acknowledge.
Yeah, take ownership of it.
Yeah. And so for the first few months, I was kind of like, I'm okay. And that became what I realized is like, I wasn't okay. And it got to a point where I'd just been traveling. I went kind of as a bit of I did it in a way, being honest, a bit of an FU to the world. You know, it's like, you know, sod you, I'm going traveling. I do not need to be conforming to your life. And I had the most amazing experience, and it really changed my outlook on life. But then I came back and had to face reality. Yeah. And I didn't have my house. I didn't have this relationship. I didn't have everything I wanted. And I was just in a rented room in a new town with no one I knew, starting a new job. And all I had was my dog. And it was at that point where I was like, I've had enough. I didn't want to be here.
And you were near to suicide at that point, weren't you?
Yeah, it's the thoughts that go through your head. I mean, I'm sure it's different for everyone, but they were horrible. You know.
Can you tell us what some of those?
Yeah, so it's driving. You know, I remember having an argument with my ex at the time. We were getting on, but we had an argument. You know, and driving on the way back, thinking I'm just going to take my car off the road. And things like that, and also having these weird, like these warped fantasies about writing suicide notes, telling people how they've done me wrong, and picturing them like, you know, to people who've done me wrong, saying this is what you've done.
So you want to make them feel guilty.
Exactly. It's just, and it was horrible. And I remember sitting there and also think, God, how could I do that to someone? But that's kind of the stuff I was going through at the time. And I think, and around that time, I was kind of questioning my job as a mental health nurse anyway. I was realizing that, you know, I didn't really like the way the diagnostic labels we give to people. I kind of felt like we were telling people they were ill when it wasn't illness. It was more about what's happened to them.
trauma, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, trauma, distressful, you know, events in our lives affect our perception of ourselves and our world. And I was thinking, God, I didn't really like it. So I was kind of thinking, well, I want to change. And I had this idea around the time about speaking more about like the stuff that happens in life that affects the way you perceive yourself and your world and stuff like that. And I started reading like Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
I came across his story, you know, the Auschwitz survivor, the psychiatrist. I'm sure you've heard his story. Who, you know,
Well, my father was a Holocaust survivor, so yeah.
yeah. So
Man's Search for Meaning is a wonderful book. If anyone is listening, they should absolutely read it.
It's a life change. It's a life changer. It was a life changer for me because I just been reading it and I remember the quote, and obviously I'll say it in my own words, but he basically says everything can be taken from you except your ability to choose how you respond and your ability to choose your own way.
And which boils down to choice, doesn't it?
It boils down to choice.
To us, it's what we do with it. That's what really matters.
It's the personal power. We have this power within us. You know, Carl Jung says, those who look outside dream, those who look inside awaken. And I think I was spending my whole life looking outside, hoping people would fill these holes.
So you suddenly realized it was an inside job.
It's an inside job. It was 100% an inside job. And I was laying there on my floor, having these awful thoughts. And the quote, I was scrolling on the internet thinking, what can I just need to escape this? And not necessarily looking at how I was going to kill myself, but like, I just need something to help me. And again, that kind of quote just come up because I think I'd written it down my phone. And as I lifted up to get myself, I remember looking in my mirror and it was almost like goosebumps. It sounds quite a bit over the top, but it
sounds like there was a big shift going on. It doesn't go over the top at all. It's great when these energetic shifts take place.
Well, this is it. And I looked in the mirror and it was almost like goosebumps. And it was almost like, oh, it's me. It's me. It's like, you know, I'm looking for someone to love me, but I need to start learning how I can love myself and how I can matter to myself and how I can be good enough to myself. And then I just became fascinated with, like, you know, we ask these questions, why we often focus, why did this happen to me? Why didn't they love me? And it was more like, I started being fascinated by how has what has happened to me affected me?
Yeah.
How has it changed my perception? How has it changed my perception of me in the world? And what can I do to change my life? And it literally
big questions.
big questions. It's not, and it's not something you click your fingers at and then you're like, oh my God, I'm living my best life. It's an unraveling. It's like the old, you know, the onion, you know, you're peeling away the onions.
And the first layer of the onion is very hard to take off.
It is.
But then it gets easier.
It does. And it also means, you know, I think a lot of what we see in social media and stuff, we promote a lot about, you know, we talk about what happened to you as how it's affected you. And we kind of, it's not just about how the bad things happen to you. It's also being aware of what we've done to people, yes. How we treat people and having the courage to confront that, because we, you know, when we have traumatic experiences, as I say, we project onto people and it's quite hard. It's, you know, you kind of go through the emotions, you know. I think you start showing compassion to yourself and that helps lift the shame, but then you confront guilt, which is thinking, well, how have I treated other people? And you're like, God, I wish I hadn't have done that. And then it's like,
it's an interesting journey, isn't it? Because you have to go in to really question, and then you have to go out to look at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
What you have journeyed, that's what you have done.
Exactly. But in a weird way, and I think it's very true, you sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to kind of to climb back up again. And I think
what you felt that you had to do.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of like.
And your relationship with your dad at this point, what's happened to that?
So one of the things I realized is, you know, and I say this, and it's probably the key point that I make when I do my talks, when I work with people, is that choice, responsibility, personal responsibility. Your life is your responsibility. You know, we can ask people to help us along the way, but as Jim Rohn says, you can't get people to do your push-ups for you.
No.
And as much as I would want my dad to suddenly go, I'm sorry. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to paint my dad as the really awful person.
I always think that people are doing the best job that they can do with the tools that they have. Yeah. So if he's not emotionally available to you, sadly, he's not emotionally available to himself.
Exactly. And this is what I realized. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I could say to myself, I'm going to let go and heal when he when he eventually apologizes for whatever it is I want him to apologize for, or I can just accept him for who he is. I can acknowledge that I've now established these new boundaries and I'm not prepared to have that relationship if he continues to approach me and deal with what's happened in the way that he has been dealing with it. And I'm okay with that. It's like that acceptance, you know, we talk about forgiveness, and forgiveness is so important, but it's the first step is the accepting that you cannot change other people.
No, it's hard enough to change ourselves, really, isn't it? How can we possibly change anyone else?
Exactly.
And do you have a relationship with him now?
Do I have a relationship with him now?
Yeah.
No, I've drawn the line at the moment. No, I've drawn for me, I've decided what my boundaries are. I've put them in place and I've left it there. And, you know.
And was this something that you told him or you just did?
I just did.
Okay.
Something I still question, do I need to tell him what that's about? But for me, having already, prior to making that decision, because as I was on that journey of kind of of peeling those layers of the onion away from myself, I did challenge some of the stuff that, in particular, around how he was with my sister, and it was very dismissive. And I thought, I can see where this is going to go. And I challenged it, and it was kind of the response I had been used to getting, but I hadn't actually seen it because of my, you know, the pools of our relationships we envisage with our parents. And, you know, on a biological level, we're so connected to these people that I wasn't able to see it because he's my dad, he's the best person. But in that moment, I was able to see, like, when he was saying, you know, I asked him to do something for me and to tell my sister about something, and he just went into one. He said we should be grateful for what he did for us, that he rescued us, that most dads would leave their children in an orphanage, all this sort of stuff, which was like, and this is stuff
on you as well then, isn't it?
Yeah, it was like, and all this, I could see where all this shame would suddenly come from. I was like, oh my God, I've literally in a way been fed this kind of dialogue that maybe that wasn't his intention, but it was like, because he was projecting his own pain onto us, saying that we were, in a way, just saying you're not good enough, or that's how I interpreted it. And then it was like, it all just twigged for me, you know, it just clicked, and I was like, wow, okay. And then that was the moment I was 34 at the time. Again, I've been spent all these years turning a blind eye to that, not aware that I was doing it, but now I can see it. I'm like, nah, no longer, you know. And that
serve you at the moment to have a relationship with him. It's not healthy for you.
Yeah, and yeah,
still not boundaries, which is good for people to hear as well, because it's not an easy choice, but it's for your well-being. It's a better choice for you.
Exactly. And then that's ultimately what we need to focus on. It's not selfish to put in place what's going to be healthy for you. Yes. I think sometimes we can go with forgiveness. We get this idea that we have to suddenly forgive them and be best friends with them and welcome into the life unconditionally.
And have lunch with them just because you've forgiven them and have understanding.
No. Forgiveness is accepting what's happened, that you cannot change it, and then putting boundaries in place that are going to nurture you. And I think that's the key to it, really. And that's what I decided to do, and decided to put myself first and fill those holes myself, the holes that were, you know, that were never really there. It's just I wasn't able to love myself in a way that we're not taught, are we, in school? You don't go to school and people go, you should learn to love yourself. We don't teach responsibility. We don't talk about critical thinking and emotional intelligence and stuff.
That's what you like to do. You especially like to speak to 18 to 21-year-olds to teach the things that you wish you were taught, the emotional intelligence rather than the academia. You wish that somebody had taught you how to grieve, how to talk about what's going on inside. You know, it's okay to feel these feelings. So tell us a little bit about the work you do with young people.
So I call myself an authenticity coach because I've realized that the key to like happiness and fulfillment and living kind of the best life is doing what resonates and matters with you. And growing up, that kind of gets beaten out of you. And so what I do is I help people to realize where their personal power is, by recognizing that your life is your responsibility, but then asking them, well, if your life's your responsibility, what do you want?
Yes.
What do you want? And what can you do?
Question to ask a young person, isn't it? Because it's at that time we're like, well, I don't know.
Well, this is it. And what you want doesn't necessarily mean you have to figure out, well, I want to be this. It's more, I want to do this. It's like, what sort of person do you want to be? You know, what sort of things do you enjoy doing? What are your strengths? What lights you up? Because I think that's really what we should focus on. Like, No one has to have their life figured out at 16, 17,
No,
18.
mine's all constantly changing and evolving at 55, always.
Exactly. We talk about this thing called purpose, which is often raised, and I believe in purpose, but I believe it's a sense of just being the best version of you. Your purpose is to be the best version. It's not today, oh, I have to, go work in India and do all this charity work or whatever. You don't have to find something big and profound that you do. It's just literally about being the best version of you and doing the things that you enjoy and being the person that you enjoy. Because when you're doing that stuff, then you are the best version of you, and you're less likely to feel low. It doesn't mean you're to feel depressed, to feel anxious. It doesn't mean you're never going to have pain. But when you're experiencing pain, you'll have a purpose to carry on, because you're living a life that matters to you.
Yeah, and you'll be better equipped to deal with it.
Exactly.
Because I spoke to somebody yesterday, Emma Jane, who was one of my guests, and she says you can't fight pain with pain. You have to actually embrace it in some way, acknowledge it, sit down with it and be okay with it, and then you can move on with it. You have to work through it rather than avoid it.
Well, exactly. You have to feel to heal, don't you, as they say. And
I love that saying, feel to heal.
It's true, because when you have an emotion, the problem with emotions isn't the emotion, it's usually the behavior. But the behavior usually comes from we layer our emotions and we start judging how we feel, and that's often how we're raised. We're told not to cry, so when we're sad and we want to cry, we suddenly go, oh, but I was told not to cry.
I
Because
think maybe especially more for little boys, I don't know.
Yeah, and this is what
Don't be a girl, they say, which is even worse.
Well, it is and I think one thing I've noticed in my career is, in mental health for many years, it was kind of like, well, this is the age you kind of see the onset for certain presentations. But when I was working in a crisis team, we'd be assessing people, and you'd get 50-year-old men who were suddenly having like manic episodes. And people would be going, this is weird. This doesn't happen to 50-year-old men. But actually, when you look at their life and what's happened, and all the times they've maybe be told this is the role you play as a man. You're a provider. You need to provide for your family. So they're like working 90, 100 hours a week. They're burning themselves out. And then they're getting to the point where they're not sleeping.
Stuffing it and stuffing it and stuffing it down for years. It's got to spill out eventually, hasn't it?
Exactly. And as we say, it will come out in some way, and it will come out usually. It comes out in kind of some kind of mental health presentation or a physical illness, and it tends to just this kind of the trauma we experience creates stress within us that then comes out in some way, shape or form.
Absolutely.
And it's that's why for me, and it's still a journey. It's like when I'm feeling something, it's telling yourself, well, it's okay to feel that way, because that's not the problem. It's the behavior usually was the problem. If I'm sad and then I decide to go beat someone up for it, well, that's the problem. It's the behavior. It's not the emotion. But we're often scared to feel because we associate feeling with what other people have told us about that, how we should feel, what we should do with it. And
it's very clear you have been on a massive journey of self-discovery. And often, before the show, the episode, I have a chat with my guests and we just talk about their story and work out the title for the show. And you wanted to call it The Empowering Truth. So this is now what you mean by your empowering truth.
Yes.
How to accept yourself and to know that you are enough and you're okay, and not to fight, as you say, you've got to feel to heal.
Exactly. It's 100%. It's like we have, Spider-Man. I love Marvel, and there's a line in Spider-Man that says, with great power comes great responsibility. But I actually think with great responsibility comes great power. And I think we have this power within us, that when we take ownership of our lives and responsible and recognize that power is within us, literally we unleash the best version of ourselves.
I like that. I haven't had a quote by Marvel yet on my show, so you could be my first Marvel quote.
Well, I've twisted it a little bit to fit with with my theme, but yeah, I think when we realize that we have so much power, when we realize our life is our choice, we literally can be like, oh wow, life can be actually really good. So it takes time. Yeah,
just before we end up here, could you give me just a few tips for anyone that's listening that's struggling right now, things that have really helped you to get to where you are in your unbroken state?
I think obviously there's a lot. I'm going to say the usual talking is huge. Now I sit on the fence a little bit with talking, because talking's only as good as the person who's listening sometimes.
You have to choose who you find to speak to very carefully.
Exactly. And that's why I think there can be other ways. So now people sound crazy people think I'm crazy when I say this, but talking to yourself, saying your thoughts out loud, whether that's journaling, recording what you're saying, kind of and asking yourself just questions of what am I trying to do here? What needs am I trying to meet? Rather than why has this happened to me? As I said, how has this affected me? How do I see the world? How do I see myself? Just asking kind of better questions. And for me, it was kind of that kind of looking inside, that kind of asking better questions about how I've responded to life rather than how life has treated me.
Well, it's clear that sent you on this journey of inquiry, really, didn't it?
Exactly. And you'll be amazed. Like, I think it was Nathaniel Brandon said in his book, Taking Responsibility, that we know more than we know and we can do more than we can do. And I think when we start asking those questions and start taking that responsibility, we start to realize, oh, wow, actually, you know, I wasn't aware of that, but now I am. It's like, as I say, it's bringing making the unconscious conscious, isn't it? And by asking those questions, we can do that. So journaling and just talking to ourselves or to people who you feel safe. Safety is paramount in overcoming your trauma and your wounds.
And I guess it's all about stop denying it as well, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
What you're doing.
Radical acceptance, as they call it in DBT. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end, with some radical acceptance. So I just really want to thank you so much, Alex, for coming on and sharing your story with us today. I'm sure you will definitely inspire other people, because you are just shining so brightly. It's just lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeleine Black, playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeleine Black.